They tell you the digital age killed the ghost story, but they're wrong. The ghosts didn't vanish, they just upgraded. They found a higher resolution, a faster bitrate, and a way to hide inside the very pixels we stare at until our eyes bleed. We live in an era of total connectivity, where every byte of data is indexed, tagged, and tracked by an algorithm that knows our heart rate better than we do. We feel safe because we think we're the ones holding the remote. But have you ever considered that the glass in your living room isn't just a window? It's a two-way street. And sometimes something from the other side decides it's tired of waiting for an invite. My descent began on a Tuesday, during that hollow gray hour between 2 and 3 in the morning. You know the ritual. It's the scrolling for sleep, that desperate, thumb-numbing search for enough mindless content to drown out the sound of your own thoughts. I was sprawled on the couch, the remnants of a lukewarm pizza box on the coffee table, and my phone charging nearby, its green LED pulsing like a slow heartbeat. I was flipping through the apps on my new 8K smart TV, a beast of a machine that cost more than my first car and promised a hyper-realistic immersion that I was currently using to watch old sitcom reruns. I was scrolling through the live channel guide, a long list of news, sports, and shopping networks, when the UI stuttered. The cursor skipped a beat, jumping past the local weather station and landing on a blank space. It was a channel with no name, no number, no metadata. The preview box, which usually showed a thumbnail of the current broadcast, was a void of pure, deep black. Normally a glitch like that would just be a firmware hiccup, a dropped packet, or a server error. But there was something about the way that black square sat on the screen that felt intentional. It wasn't the absence of an image, it was the presence of a shadow. I clicked it. Curiosity is a predator that usually eats its owner first. I expected static. I expected a signal not found message or a spinning loading icon. Instead, the screen snapped into a clarity that actually made my stomach drop. It was high definition beyond anything I had ever seen. The blacks were so deep they seemed to pull the light out of the room, and the colors were so sharp they felt like they could cut. But it wasn't a movie. It wasn't a show. It was a perfectly still, fixed-angle shot of a hallway. A white hallway with a silver-handled door at the far end, and a small, jagged scuff mark on the baseboard near the bottom left. My breath hitched. My skin went cold, a prickling sensation spreading from my neck down to my fingertips. I didn't need a caption to tell me what I was looking at. I knew that scuff mark. I had made it 3 months ago while moving a heavy bookshelf. The TV wasn't broadcasting a signal from a studio. It was displaying a live feed of the hallway directly behind my head. I sat perfectly still, the remote control feeling like a dead weight in my hand. The contrast was nauseating. To my left, the living room was a mess of lived-in comfort. The soft, amber glow of my smart bulbs dimmed to 20%, the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, and the lingering scent of pepperoni and cardboard. It was a space defined by my own presence, a curated bubble of 21st century safety. But directly in front of me, framed by the thin obsidian bezel of the 8K display, was a version of my home that felt entirely alien. The image was impossibly crisp. We talk about high definition as if it's a ceiling we've already reached, but this was something else. It was as if the screen had ceased to be a surface of pixels and had instead become a literal hole in the wall. There was no digital noise, no motion blur, not even the faint flickering of light you expect from a live camera feed. It was hyperreal, a sterile, bone-chilling clarity that made the real world behind me look dull and out of focus by comparison. I stared at the hallway on the screen. It was my hallway, down to the specific grain of the oak flooring, and the way the shadows pooled under the small console table. But as my eyes adjusted to the unnatural light of the broadcast, I realized the details were subtly, terrifyingly wrong. In my actual house, the hallway was dark, illuminated only by the spillover light from the living room. On the screen, the hallway was bathed in a flat, clinical white light that seemed to come from nowhere. There were no light fixtures on the ceiling of the broadcast, yet every corner was illuminated with a surgical precision that left nowhere to hide. Then there was the door at the end of the hall. In my reality, that door led to my bedroom. It was a standard white-paneled door, usually left slightly ajar so the cat could wander in and out. On the no-name channel, the door was shut tight. And it wasn't just closed, it looked heavy. The silver handle didn't reflect the room. It looked matte, like it had been forged from some dense, light-absorbing metal. I looked over my shoulder, my heart hammering against my ribs. My real door was right there, 5 inches open, exactly as I'd left it. I looked back at the screen. Jean. A cold, greasy sweat broke out across my forehead. I told myself it was a prank. A sophisticated hack. Maybe someone had installed a hidden camera while I was out and was playing back a pre-recorded loop to mess with me. But then a shadow moved on the screen. It wasn't a person. It was a distortion, a ripple in the hyper-clear air of the broadcast hallway. It started at the baseboard, right near that jagged scuff mark I'd made, and crawled upward like a stain. As it moved, the high-definition image began to shiver. The oak floorboards on the screen didn't just look like wood anymore. They looked like they were breathing, the grain shifting in a slow, rhythmic pulse. The clarity of the image was so intense that I could see the individual fibers of the wood standing up, reacting to the shadow's presence like hair on a neck. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and pressed the volume up button on the remote. I expected the static hiss of an empty channel or the silence of a dead feed. Instead, the speakers emitted a sound that made my blood turn to ice. It was a low-frequency thrum, a sound so deep I felt it in my marrow more than I heard it in my ears. It sounded like the vibration of a massive, industrial engine idling somewhere deep underground. And underneath that thrum, there was a wet, rhythmic scratching. Zgrudge, zgrudge, zgrudge. The sound was coming from the screen, but my brain was convinced it was coming from the floorboards beneath my feet. I looked at the TV, then at the real hallway, then back to the TV. The contrast was a trap. The real world felt flimsy, like a paper set that could be torn down at any moment, while the zero signal on the screen felt like the only thing that was truly solid. I wanted to turn it off. I wanted to pull the plug. But a terrifying thought pinned me to the couch. If I turned off the screen, would the hallway behind me stay the way it was, or would it snap into the high-definition nightmare I was currently watching? I stared at the remote in my palm, my thumb hovering over the directional pad. It was a standard piece of plastic, mass-produced and unremarkable, yet in this moment, it felt like a surgical instrument capable of dissecting my own reality. I took a shallow breath, the air tasting of stale ozone and cold house dust, and I pressed the right arrow. The screen didn't click or lag. The perspective simply drifted. It was a smooth, cinematic pan that shouldn't have been possible from a fixed security camera. The lens on the no-name channel glided away from the bedroom door and swung toward the living room entrance, the very threshold where I was currently sitting. I watched the screen as the view panned past the coat rack, past the mirror, and finally stopped. The TV was now displaying the back of my own head. I could see the individual strands of my hair, illuminated by the screen's own blue glow. I could see the slight slouch of my shoulders and the way the fabric of my t-shirt pulled across my back. The resolution was so invasive that I could actually see the pulse of the artery in my neck. It was a level of intimacy that felt like a physical violation. I dropped the remote. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, the sound echoing with a sharp, hollow finality. On the screen, the digital version of me didn't flinch. He remained perfectly still, a frozen avatar of my own terror. Suddenly, a notification chime rang out, not from my phone, but from the TV speakers. It was a crisp, crystalline sound, the kind of polished UI noise you'd expect from a high-end social media app. A sidebar slid out from the right edge of the screen, translucent and sleek. At the top, in a font that was modern and disturbingly friendly, were the words, "Community Feed Live." My eyes scanned the text as it began to scroll. User 882, he dropped the remote. Typical. They always get shaky at this stage. Spectre logic, look at the framing though. The 8K really brings out the existential dread in his posture. 1010 for the setup. Void Walker, do you think he knows about the door yet? The one in the crawl space. I bet he hasn't checked the crawl space in years. Admin 0, stay tuned. The broadcast is just reaching the first inflection point. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the signal. I felt a surge of hysterical, cynical laughter bubble up in my chest. This was some elaborate, high-tech prank. It had to be. Some group of hackers had compromised my home network, accessed my smart devices, and were now live-streaming my reaction to a private corner of the dark web. I stood up, my legs feeling like they belonged to a marionette, and turned toward the back of the room, expecting to see a camera lens hidden in the bookshelf or a drone hovering near the ceiling. There was nothing. Just the familiar, dim shadows of my apartment. I turned back to the TV. On the screen, the me had also stood up. But he wasn't looking for cameras. He was staring directly at the bedroom door at the end of the hall. The chat sidebar was moving faster now, a blur of commentary and emojis I didn't recognize, symbols that looked like distorted eyes and bleeding screens. Leo, I whispered to the empty room, using my own name to ground myself. It's just code. It's just an interface. User 404, he's talking to himself now. The isolation is starting to set in. Beautiful. Ghost Rider, hey Leo, look at the screen. Not the hallway. Look at the sidebar. My gaze snapped to the chat. A new message was pinned at the bottom, highlighted in a pulsating crimson. Admin 0, we see you, Leo. We see the pizza you didn't finish. We see the guilt you carry about that phone call you didn't answer last November. The no-name channel doesn't just broadcast space, it broadcasts weight. Why don't you show the viewers what's behind the bedroom door? I felt a coldness settle into my gut that no heater could touch. November. The phone call. That wasn't something a hacker could find in a cloud backup. That was a secret kept in the quiet, rotting corners of my conscience. I looked at the TV, then at the real hallway. The contrast was sharpening. My real hallway was dark, silent, and mundane. But the hallway on the screen felt like the prime version, the one where the real action was happening. The FOMO, the fear of missing out, is usually a shallow, modern anxiety. The fear that everyone is at a party you weren't invited to. But here, it was transformed into something predatory. I felt a paradoxical urge to walk into that hallway, to match my movements to the screen, to see the truth that these anonymous viewers were so excited about. They knew something I didn't. They were watching a show where I was the star, but I hadn't been given the script. Don't do it, I told myself. But my hand was already reaching for the wall, feeling for the light switch that I knew wouldn't change a thing on the screen. I retreated from the hallway, my back pressing against the cool, painted drywall of the living room. I needed logic. I needed the familiar, cynical comfort of a search engine to tell me that this was a documented phenomenon, a clever marketing stunt, or a known security vulnerability. I grabbed my laptop from the coffee table, the screen's light feeling weak and sickly compared to the 8K monstrosity looming behind me. My fingers flew across the keys, searching for the manufacturer's name followed by keywords like unnamed channel, secret broadcast, and hidden firmware. The surface web was a dead end. The official forums were filled with the usual complaints: slow UI, dead pixels, apps crashing, but nothing that touched the boundary of what I was witnessing. I dug deeper. I bypassed the indexed results and slipped into the niche tech horror subreddits and archived hardware boards where the real obsessives lived. After 20 minutes of frantic clicking, I found a thread on an old, non-indexed hobbyist site. The title was a string of hexadecimal code that translated to "the frequency of the lost." According to a user named xdev7, there was a redacted firmware update pushed to a specific line of high-end smart TVs back in 2018. It wasn't an official release. It was a phantom patch, distributed via a secondary server that bypassed the standard verification protocols. The post claimed that this update contained a subroutine designed to utilize the TV's glass as a high-frequency receiver, not for Wi-Fi or satellite signals, but for residual data. The theory was as fascinating as it was terrifying. In the digital age, we produce trillions of gigabytes of data every second. Most of it is captured and stored, but a small percentage is lost. Not deleted, but simply failed, data that the internet's infrastructure couldn't process. Broken packets of information, corrupted memories, deleted videos that contained too much emotional weight, and the digital echoes of people who had vanished. This no-name channel was a digital purgatory, a reservoir for the things the world had tried to purge but couldn't destroy. It was a frequency where the discarded parts of reality were reconstructed into a broadcast that only the unlocked hardware could receive. The Firmware Conspiracy, the post called it. The idea that modern screens aren't just displays, but sophisticated filters. The manufacturers knew. They were designing these devices with the capacity to peer into the buffer zone between the physical world and the digital void. We weren't buying entertainment centers. We were installing digital shrines to the things we'd forgotten. I looked back at the TV. The chat sidebar was still scrolling, but the messages were becoming more technical, more urgent. User 99, he found the 2018 logs. He's starting to see the architecture. Ghostwriter, seeing the architecture isn't the same as surviving the build, 99. Admin 0, the data doesn't like to be looked at, Leo. It likes to look back. You're opening a door that doesn't have a latch on your side. I felt a wave of nausea. If this channel was a purgatory for lost data, why was it showing my hallway? Why was it showing my bedroom? I thought back to the phone call from November. My sister. She had called 3 times, and I had watched the screen of my phone light up on the nightstand, choosing to let it go to voicemail because I was too tired, too selfish, too wrapped up in my own mundane stresses to deal with her crisis. She had disappeared 2 days later. No note, no bodies, just a missing person file that had slowly gathered dust on a detective's desk. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. I had deleted her last voicemail without listening to it. I had tried to purge that data from my life because it was too heavy to carry. Was she in there? Was the no-name channel broadcasting the piece of my life I had failed to process? The FOMO, the fear of missing out, morphed into a much darker, much more intimate dread. It was the fear of finally seeing what I had purposely ignored. I realized that the community in the chat weren't just random hackers. They were observers of the harvest. They were there to watch as the digital purgatory reclaimed its own. I looked at the TV screen again. The high-definition image of the hallway had shifted. The lighting was even more clinical now, but the walls were starting to look translucent. I could see the copper wiring inside the walls, the studs, the insulation. It looked like a 3D architectural render, but it was pulsing with a dark, rhythmic energy. And then the camera moved again. It didn't pan this time. It zoomed. It moved through the bedroom door as if the wood were nothing more than a mist. The screen displayed my bedroom. Everything was in its place: the unmade bed, the pile of laundry in the corner, the salt lamp on the nightstand. But standing by the window was a figure. It was rendered in the same impossibly high resolution as the rest of the broadcast. The detail was so intense I could see the individual pores on its skin, the fine downy hair on its arms. It was my sister. She was wearing the same coat she had been wearing in the last photo I saw of her. But she wasn't moving. She was just staring at the window, her back to the camera. Zero. I whispered, the name feeling like a jagged stone in my throat. The chat went wild. User 882, there she is. The 2018 protocol in action. Spectre logic, look at the detail on the coat. That's not a render. That's a retrieval. Admin 0, tell her you're sorry, Leo. Maybe she'll let you into the frame. I reached out to touch the screen, but my hand stopped an inch from the glass. The heat radiating from the panel was immense, a dry, electric fever that made the air shimmer. On the screen, the image of my current bedroom didn't just fade, it folded. The pixels didn't change color, they rearranged themselves with a sickening, mechanical grinding sound that echoed through the room's surround sound system. The modern walls of my apartment melted away, replaced by the faded, glow-in-the-dark star-covered ceiling of my childhood bedroom. I was looking at a memory, but it was far more vivid than my own mind could ever conjure. This was the high-definition retrieval the firmware post had whispered about. There I was, aged 7, sitting on the edge of a race car bed that had been thrown out 2 decades ago. I was holding a toy that had been lost in a move, its primary colors so bright they looked radioactive on the 8K display. The version of me on the screen looked happy, but as the camera zoomed in, I saw the terror in his eyes. He wasn't looking at the toy. He was looking at the screen, at me. He sees the observer, the sidebar flickered. User 77, the temporal bridge is stabilizing. Look at the edges of the frame. I looked. The crisp, surgical lines of the bedroom were beginning to fray. It wasn't a digital glitch. It didn't look like blocky compression or colorful artifacts. It looked like biological decay. The edges of the screen were beginning to sprout thin, pulsing veins. The wooden floorboards of my old room were transforming into something that resembled muscular tissue, the grain of the wood becoming the striations of a heart. The high-definition clarity was still there, but it was being used to render something grotesque. I could see the sweat on the skin of the walls. I could see the way the ceiling flickered with the rhythm of a dying lung. The contrast between the two worlds was becoming unbearable. Behind me, my modern living room felt like a ghost, thin, gray, and increasingly irrelevant. The TV was the only thing with weight, the only thing with life. It felt as if the room I was sitting in was being drained of its reality to provide the processing power for the broadcast.